Welcome to our business track of the Data Science Salon YouTube channel. This is a presentation by Kang, Director of Data Science in Gannett, where she talks about how one persistent challenge of data science is getting adoption. She shares a look into how her team makes stakeholders a part of the solution to keyword optimization, asking the right questions, using their feedback to course correct their modeling approach and creating a better outcome for all parties involved. Enjoy.
Hi there. My name is Kang, and I'm a Director of Data Science at Gannett. And today I'd like to talk you through the advertising universe and talk about our stakeholder in the loop approach to keyword optimization. Many of you may not know what Gannett is, but you may actually live within a few miles of one of our local newspapers. On the B2C side, we are the media holding company behind the USA Today network and the largest US newspaper publisher by circulation. We have 450 local media properties, and that includes household names like the USA Today, Indy Star, Detroit Free Press, AZ Central, among many others. So over on the B2B side, we connect local consumers to local businesses through our suite of digital marketing solutions, which we call Local IQ, and that's where my team sits. So we help local businesses run better campaigns across search, social, and display, optimizing their spend while reducing waste and delivering solutions at scale that's tailored to their goals. So none of the data science work we do on that front happens in a vacuum, and our stakeholders are always involved from the get-go. So today I'd like to talk about how we prioritize and execute on projects with stakeholders and take a closer look at one of them. So when it comes to prioritizing projects, we really look at two things. So we look at data readiness and we look at business impact. So without data readiness, the analysis is either impossible or we wouldn't want to trust the results. And without business impact, well, it goes without saying that we would literally be building a bridge to nowhere. So our goal on this team is always to find the happy middle where the two meet, to use data to drive solutions that make a difference. So let's look at each of those bubbles separately. Well, in terms of data readiness, we look at a few things. So historical data. Do we know if it's clean? Do we know if it's complete? Do we know who collected it and how? And what about key hypotheses and testable metrics? Do we know what they are? Do we agree on how to measure? And if not, well, the project might need to be better scoped. And let's talk about effort as well. So is it going to be in weeks? Is it going to be in months? Well, if we don't have a good sense, let's maybe take a look at past projects that are somewhat similar to get us a better idea. And finally, do we have the support of other teams to get it across the finish line? So of course, this isn't applicable to all projects. You are going to have one-off ad hoc projects, but where we need productionizing, we want to make sure that whatever is on our team's roadmap is also on other teams' roadmap, so that we have a whole pipeline set up and everyone is clear on when and where the handoff is supposed to occur. So going over onto the business impact side, well, that is actually often harder to assess than data readiness. And it really takes us going into journalism mode to interview stakeholders about what they want and why they want it. So we look for things like tie-ins to key initiatives. Well, does it drive revenue? Does it increase efficiency? Or if we don't do this project right now, is it going to end up being a blocker to a future key initiative? So projects that don't really have any tie-ins to key initiatives tend to get abandoned for something else that does. And also existing assumptions. What have we tried in terms of tackling this particular problem? What is current practice? So knowing that is helpful because it prevents us from reinventing the wheel or falling into the same hole twice. And KPIs. What needles are we trying to move there? So if we don't agree on the KPIs, that's an early sign that we might need to think more deeply about the problem before we even attempt to solve it. And in terms of cost, direct cost, how much time and resource commitment are we talking about? And in terms of indirect cost, what are we giving up so that we can do this project? And last but not least, what is good enough? So what is good enough for beta? What is good enough for version 1, for version 2? Knowing that helps prevent us from going down a rabbit hole, chasing a certain level of accuracy or perhaps some nice to have features that really don't have any realistic benefit. So once we've gotten a sense of how the projects look like along the data readiness and the business impact dimensions, we can lay them out on a 2x2. So in box 1, in dark green, you have those very nice high impact and high data readiness projects. These are in the sweet spot and they get prioritized without question. In box 2, well, you have projects that are high impact but low in terms of data readiness. So these get green lighted for exploration, which means we're going to take a look at why data readiness is low. We're going to take a look at where the holes are and potentially how to fill them. And in some cases, we may decide to do a skinny version of the original proposal based on the data that we do have and trust. So over in box 3, you have kind of the other side of the coin, the flip scenario, where you have projects with high data readiness, but low business impact. So these get sidelined on purpose. So if you look at projects that fall into this bucket, they quite often tend to be projects that are technically interesting, but they don't have any immediate business tie-ins. So they sit in the parking lot, but they don't sit there forever. There are a few ways that could get them out. Well, one would be an opening in schedule. Second would be a quick but convincing beta. And a third might be we looked back at how we're assessing business impact and discovered that our prior assumptions were somewhat flawed. And in the fourth bucket, well, this one is probably the least interesting. You have projects that are low on both dimensions. So these projects will sit there in the deprioritization bucket until things move on either axis. So as I've said earlier, my team works on the advertising side of the business. And there are many opportunities to optimize decision-making based on data. So to run a better campaign, you want to have the right keywords, you want to have the right targeting, the right bidding strategy, you want to be present on the right channels, and you also want to have the right product mix. So getting those things right will make it a lot easier for you to move your consumers down that conversion funnel from impressions to clicks to leads and eventually to a sale. So in the time we have today, I'm obviously not going to talk about everything. I just wanted to focus on one of our key 2020 priorities, and that is getting keywords right for our advertisers. In particular, how do we get low-performing keywords to do better? So to evaluate this project, our first check-in with stakeholders focused on whether or not we should do this project and whether we should do it now. So in terms of data readiness, it checks the boxes because, well, we have reliable and comprehensive keyword-level performance data that's been collected over the years. We have a commonly accepted definition of performance, so that's good. And our engineering colleagues already have the ability to automate provisioning. In terms of business impact, it is a top campaign management pain point. And campaign managers who have currently been doing it manually in a rather time-consuming way, we can actually speed up that process if we could automate what is manual and do it consistently for all of our advertisers at scale. So checking the boxes on both data readiness and business impact puts it on our roadmap. Before we dive into keyword optimization, I want to give a quick primer on keywords for those of us who don't work in advertising. I'm sure all of us have at some point searched for things on Google and seen ads come up. So for a typical search campaign, you will generally have the following. You'll have positive keywords, which is what your ad is about, the products, the services you provide. So for example, if I am selling electric transformers, I might provision keywords like electric transformers, transformers for sale near me. A second bucket of keyword is negative keywords, which as the name implies, is what your ad is not about. And it helps keep the traffic relevant to what you're selling. So if you look on the right, when I actually searched for transformers for sale, Google actually served me up two different kinds of transformers, electric transformers and the toy. So again, if I'm selling electric transformers, I might want to provision negative keywords like Optimus Prime or Bumblebee or toy. Well, a third bucket is geo keywords, which is literally just the areas that you want to target. And what we focus on in this project is optimizing low-performing positive keywords. So the problem itself seems pretty simple. If there are keywords that don't perform, if they cost more than their conversions, or they just don't convert at all, well, let's find them and let's delete them. Rinse and repeat every few weeks to make sure that we're not missing anything. And there you go, your keywords are optimized. Well, turns out that approach is a little simplistic. We did not get the full picture until we interviewed several stakeholders who actually directly manage campaigns. So our second check-in, which happened right before we really dived into data exploration, focused on getting clear on key definitions and outcomes. So what does performance mean in this particular context? Is it just cost per conversion? Or should we actually look at something a little bit more up funnel, like click-through rate or cost per click? And also, what do you do when you try to optimize keywords? How much time do we want to give to keywords to perform? What is fair? And also, how do you decide which keywords to compare for each other? What is your definition of comparable? Well, after talking to stakeholders, our revised workflow now looks like this. So notice that we're trying to go for a more apples to apples keyword performance comparison. And there is a lot more prep work that goes into it before we even start to compare performance. So we pick campaigns with enough historical data instead of every single campaign. And we look at geo-targeting and we look at product grouping. So let's go through it step by step. First off, identifying geos. That's straightforward. We know which positive keywords are associated with which geo keywords. And this is important because the same keyword in the exact same campaign could perform very differently in two different geographies. And next up, product groupings. Well, performance metrics are completely meaningless if we aren't comparing keywords to their peers. And this is especially important when you have advertisers that have both very expensive and very cheap products in the same campaign. So if we don't consider product groupings, if we just straight up looked at cost per lead, we're likely to end up eliminating all the keywords that are associated with a more expensive product. And you can see how the advertiser won't be very pleased with that. So in search advertising, ad groups are actually meant to be the way that one would bucket the keywords that describe the same product or service, but some campaigns, for various reasons, either don't have them or they have ill-defined ad groups. nonetheless, when the campaign managers were optimizing those campaigns, they still mentally bucket those keywords into product buckets. And we want to find a way to basically replicate that process. Well, enter Latent Dirichlet Allocation, which also called LDA, is simply a bag of words approach to topic modeling, where you take documents and you try to find the latent topics underlying them. So as a quick refresher, this is a very nice illustration as to how the whole process works. So you have your collection of documents on the left, and you break them down into their individual words, and you try to map them to a fixed number of topics. So the allocation of words to topics is initially going to be completely random. But over many iterations with Gibbs sampling, if you've done it right, eventually you'll end up with a set of coherent topics. You will be able to look at the words that fell in any particular topic and easily give that topic a name. So once you have those very nicely defined topics, you then go back to your original document and represent it as a distribution of topics. So similar documents then would be mapped to similar topics. So how does this relate to keywords? Well, we found that with the way that our campaigns were structured, we could treat keywords as essentially very short documents and implement LDA across all the keywords in the same campaign to find the latent topics that are basically very accurate representations of the product groupings. You might ask, how do you know how many products are going to be in any one campaign? Well, LDA gives us a way to do that. So how we tackle that is essentially we're running LDA over a range of reasonable values. Let's say from 2 to 20 topics. And for each of those runs, we record the perplexity score and then we plot it out. In terms of choosing how many topics to have, well, we stop when we stop getting a meaningful decrease in the perplexity score. If you think about this visually, this is essentially trying to find the elbow point in that plot. So in this example, we have a plastic surgery campaign. They don't have prior ad group set up. And after we run it through LDA, you see that it's very nicely segmented into these product topics. Topic 1 focuses on breast implants. Topic 2 focuses on Botox-related procedures. Topic 3 focuses on liposuction. And after we have these topics, we can then pick out the keywords that aren't pulling their weight in each one of them. So now that we've associated all the keywords with geos and a product cluster, we're ready to do some performance comparisons. So our approach is peer-based. And what I mean by that is that keywords are peers if they share the same cluster, if they have the same geo-target, and they're live at the same publisher. So for example, the same keyword can perform differently across geos. Home for sale is a low-performing keyword in New Jersey Shore, but not Market, New Jersey. High cost per lead keywords like liposuction or divorce lawyers, they're often worth a high cost per lead. And finally, the same keyword could perform very differently on Google and Bing, which is why we only compare keywords to other keywords alive at the same publisher. So in defining performance, our earlier conversations with stakeholders informed our final approach, which means that we don't just look at cost per lead. We consider a hybrid measure based on cost per click and cost per lead. And we also protect keywords that are significant lead generators for that campaign. And last but not least, we also give both the campaigns and the keywords time to perform so that we don't prematurely say that any keyword is low performing. So after nailing down performance, which is a pretty big piece, we checked in with stakeholders yet again. So this time we really wanted to walk through the different ways they optimize keywords and get a sense of their mental trade-off. So is deletion always the best way to deal with low performance? Well, as we shadowed stakeholders, we found that a lot of times they don't actually delete the keywords, they just edit them. Well, what if we could make the algorithm edit like humans do? Also, how do we want to throttle this? Like, what risks are we running by taking an aggressive approach versus a conservative approach? How tolerant are the various campaigns to non-performing keywords? Is that going to vary by subcategory? Is that going to vary by budget? All questions that we threw at our stakeholders. So that last chat made us realize that our keyword optimization also needs to be more nuanced. Well, because if we just go ahead and delete every low-performing keyword, we risk disrupting campaign spending and causing client dissatisfaction. So we literally be solving one problem and introducing another. Also, we have noticed that in historical data, many keywords that don't perform well under one match type often flourish when you change it to another match type. So this is a second reason to not just toss those relevant but low-performing keywords out. So instead, we took a more conservative approach, which is basically optimizing keywords gradually by tightening their match types. So match types are essentially different ways of specifying a keyword so that it becomes more and more restrictive over time. So as an example, formal shoes in its perfectly broad form will match to anything that's searching for shoes or formal. Formal plus shoes, which is broad modifying shoes, will only match to search queries explicitly for shoes. A phrase match, formal shoes, requires you to include in your search query the whole phrase, formal shoes. You can put other words, but those two need to be in there. And then finally, exact match, which is the most restrictive, will only match to formal shoes, and you can't put any other words before or after. So our final approach essentially edits keyword like a campaign manager would, as you can see in the blue boxes at the top. So we successively restrict keyword match types until, in the rare cases, we delete them altogether. So a lot of these editing steps are straightforward, except for two, and that is going from broad to broad modified and going from broad modified to another form of broad modification that's even more restrictive. So if you remember from last page, this whole broad modification exercise is essentially adding plus signs in front of more keywords. The problem is this: when I have a key phrase that has multiple words in it, how do I know where to put the plus signs so that it would make sense? Well, that's where natural language processing comes into play. We looked at historical data on how keywords were broad modified in the past. We reduced the keywords in question to their part of speech pattern, and we mapped out their broad modified pattern with the part of speech standing in for actual words. So in case that sounds like a mouthful, here's an example. Vacation getaways has a part of speech pattern noun, noun, and historically the most common modification for that pattern is putting a plus before the first noun. And for keywords with patterns we've never seen before, we take a best guess approach and modify the parts of speech that were more commonly broad modified. So nouns, for example, are twice as likely to be modified than adjectives or verbs. So after all that work, we want to make sure that our edits are sensible. So we held out 5,000 campaigns, pretended that there was no broad modification, applied the algorithm to it, and then compared it with what the campaign managers had actually done. And the result is actually pretty good. The recommendation by algorithm coincided with what campaign managers have done 67% of the time when we gave up to 3 potential suggestions. And it even works on longer keywords that are, say, 5 to 7 words long that are arguably harder to modify. So here comes our final check-in with stakeholders. So by now we've done a significant portion of the dev work and we're getting ready for testing and deployment. So we want to know, do our results make sense? Stakeholders reviewed and there was no significant concern. Are we likely to hurt performance? Well, we deemed that unlikely as we took a conservative approach and we never edited more than 5 to 10% of keywords for any given campaign. But let's test. So stakeholders helped us scope out over 900 campaigns across different categories for an A/B test. And finally, how do we want to present this data? As a campaign manager, do you want to view and approve, or do you want us to automate the edits? Well, we ended up choosing automation because, one, there are multiple sensible ways to edit a keyword, and what I mean is the cost of being wrong is very small. And one of the stated goals for this project is to increase efficiency and save campaign managers time. That would not happen if instead of editing, people now have to spend time reviewing and hitting the approve button. So the impact of this project is twofold. So for one, we hit the KPIs that we were aiming for once we wrote out the algorithm across all the eligible campaigns. We saw better performance, we saw real leads generated, and there was significant time savings on the part of campaign managers. Also, campaigns with this feature turned on is consistently churning less, which in Gannett terms translates into millions of dollars. And a second outcome, which is equally important, is that through this whole collaboration process, we each got a better understanding of the other side. So stakeholders got smarter on data science in terms of just what it is we do and what we need to be successful. And we got smarter about the business and learned to appreciate the perspectives and the constraints of stakeholders. So all in all, we would not have gotten what we did without keeping our stakeholders in the loop throughout the whole ideation, the development, and the deployment process. And if there's one takeaway from my presentation today, it is this, that data science could easily become an island if we focus too much on the technical at the expense of doing due diligence with our stakeholders. It is hard work. It may not come naturally. It may push you outside of your comfort zone a bit, but it is ultimately worth doing. Thank you for listening in today. I hope you've learned a bit more about advertising, and now I want to open the floor up for questions.
That was a presentation by Yi Kang, Director of Data Science at Gannett, who shared how their company makes stakeholders part of the solution to keyword optimization. If you enjoyed this presentation, please subscribe to our channel below.